What if everything we know is what someone has chosen to show?
You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my Foul Play February series. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's unsolved mystery is so insane that most people don't even believe it actually happened. But I will let you decide that for yourself. So buckle up. We're about to take off. And I'm embarrassed that even came out of my mouth, but I'm gonna keep it in. By the way, I'm posting every single day this month for Foul Play February, content like this, so if you have any requests, leave them down below, and if you're enjoying it, I would love to know that by a nice comment down below or thumbsing up this video. And let's get back to the story. So it was Germany in 1954, and a commercial aircraft San Diego Flight 513 took off on September 4th. Then it was suddenly gone. It was carrying 88 passengers and 4 crew members on a routine flight from Aachen, Germany to Chile. And somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, it disappeared without a trace. There was said to be an extensive search for these now missing 92 passengers. They searched miles of the ocean, but no wreckage was ever found, and they ultimately said that this plane was just lost at sea and that these individuals had passed. It was completely overlooked by the media and not really talked about until much later, and the only people looking for them were their family members who wanted to know what in the world happened. Then on November 14th, 1989, a journalist named Erwin Fischer wrote an article for the World Weekly News magazine, and he wanted to expose it all. He wanted to talk about the entire plane and people inside that had disappeared and magically reappeared 35 years later. That's right, Erwin was writing 35 years after the plane had gone missing, and that was the first time that it had been discussed again, and that's because it had come back. On October 12th of 1989, the plane that had gone missing since 1954 was seen again. The plane came in out of the blue over Port Algre, Brazil, and it circled the airport several times before finally landing on the tarmac. And if that wasn't creepy enough, these people at the airport didn't have any clue that this had been the missing plane yet. All they knew was that they didn't have any communication with it. The air controls were trying to contact the pilot, and it was all just static. Nobody was communicating with them. They had just landed and now were just sitting there. They decided the only thing to do was to then approach it. So they got a team together and they moved quickly. It was a team of 5, and as they got closer, they noticed the Santiago Airlines logo, and they knew something was wrong already because that airport had been closed for a few years now, quite a few years now. And in fact, 2 years after the plane they were looking at went missing. They didn't know that yet, but they were about to find out. They ran the plane's numbers, and they were in for quite a surprise because this didn't look like an old plane. It didn't look like it had wear or tear. It looked like it was in perfectly good working order. They approached the airplane as though it was some dangerous enemy, and they went and they pried open the doors, but they weren't expecting what they were about to see. It was more like a nightmare while they were still awake. They boarded, and not a single passenger or crew member was still alive. Not only that, they were all skeletons. The pilot, Captain Miguel Victor Curry, as well, and his fleshless fingers gripped the controls so tightly, even in death. But if he was dead, the real question here was how in the world did that plane land? I mean, it was still idling when it was found by everyone. This should have been something the world deserved to know, right? Well, it's thought that the people in charge didn't believe that. The airport officials started covering it up, saying they would make no comment on this reappearance that didn't really happen. And the only thing the Brazilian government was saying was that a flight had appeared out of nowhere and landed safely. But a physics professor said the public has a right to know everything about this plane, and the government has a duty to tell them. It is a crime to keep information like this a secret, especially from the relatives of the people who perished on the flight. Which is so very true. They deserved that, but I can also see why they wouldn't want to, because how do you explain something like that if you don't know yourself? Because at this point, the impossible had literally happened. A researcher, Dr. Kelso Atello, explained that it was a portal or a wormhole of sorts, and they had most likely experienced a time warp. That was the only explanation in his eyes, but even he couldn't come up with an explanation for how the pilot, who was dead, landed the plane, or how it came back perfectly fine, except for the passengers inside. Santiago airline and ex-employees were found and they were questioned about it, but the ones who were still alive said they didn't know much about the flight to begin with, so they couldn't really answer any questions. Because of this massive cover-up and no real evidence, many people said it was a hoax or an urban legend, but the people who did believe that it was a true piece of history were so angry because they were covering it up and not looking into it at all. Researchers were calling the government, asking if civilians could help assist in the whole case and figuring out what had happened, but some did understand why they would cover something like this up, that it would cause a panic to find out a sudden truth about the world that you didn't believe existed before, and it could cause people to be scared and that most people weren't ready for it. Or this all could just be a very well distributed urban legend or story, because we all know that there are plenty of shows with premises like this. Of course, science fiction is just, it sounds like one huge science fiction short story. In fact, just last year, a show called Manifest came out with basically the premise to this. They went on a flight and it got kind of turbulent and bumpy, but when they landed, they were relieved, and then they found that 5 years had passed while they were up in the air, which seemed like 5 minutes. Sound familiar? Really does. And you'll have to let me know if you've watched that show, because it looks really good and I want to watch it. I just haven't had time to yet, but I would love to, so let me know if it's worth my time down below. But hey, maybe the creators of all of these stories did read the article back in the past, and that's how they came up with this, because the best fiction comes from facts from the past, right? Some believe this is what happened to the Malaysia Airlines flight 370 that disappeared on March 8th, 2014, and still hasn't been seen to this day. But let's just hope, if that's what happened and they come back, that it's more like the show in regards to they are all alive and well when they are found. Do you find any truth in Flight 513 and the skeleton landing? I, for one, like to stay open-minded to things, and just because it seems impossible doesn't mean we know everything, so it could very well be possible for something like this to happen. I mean, time warps I can get behind, but the whole skeleton thing I really can't. Only because, not because I don't think they could have died in the time warp, but because how in the world would they have landed the plane? They would have crashed. Unless, you know, somehow the time warp was right as they were dropping, like they were just trying to land and then the time warp happened and they died as they came down, and it just happened to land correctly. But although it did stop, they would have already had to been landed and then the time warp happened, or the time they came out of the time warp or something, you know? It just doesn't, I probably don't make any sense because I don't know anything about time warps really, except for the fact that they sound really cool, but it just, there's not a lot of possibility there. You have to really stretch it to make it seem plausible. It does seem quite out there, but I thought it was a creepy story nonetheless, and hey, maybe it was such a big cover-up that it makes it sound crazy when we talk about it, and it worked. Because we all know that the government and, you know, the Illuminati or whatever you want to say does try to make people sound crazy when they talk about facts that just aren't ready to come out to the world yet. Or maybe the people on that flight did survive and they smuggled them out of there, and they made that part of the story too, is that they were already dead, so nobody really cared if they were already passed. You know, people are more likely to be intrigued if they're still alive. Who knows? But I think that the biggest mystery of this entire thing is why in the world we trust giant metal cages, whether it's a plane or a car, to transport us around, and like we trust it with our life. That's scary. I mean, we literally let an airplane guide us through the air like a bird, like a giant heavy metal bird, and we put all of our trust in it. That's terrifying. Why do we do that? And that is certainly something you can't think about too hard, or you'll never want to leave your house again. But I'd love to know if you've ever heard of this, if you've ever heard of anything like it. And I definitely would lead more towards urban legend, but I thought it was really cool anyway. And I'd love to hear your theories on the Malaysian airplane that went missing, because the articles I was reading, they were searching just as soon as last year for them again, and they still didn't find much. So yeah, and if they did find something and I just am not aware, leave that down below too. I'd love to hear anything about that, because I find it so incredibly strange and heartbreaking that those families just have no idea. Their families went on a plane and just poof, they're gone. But I am loving being with you every single day for Foul Play February this month, and so please make sure to come back tomorrow and we can chat in the comments down below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. It just encourages me through all this hard work to keep going. So don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.
History, after all, is just stories in different categories.